My name is Ken Miller. I'm the director of Bayliss Public Library. I'd like to welcome everyone to the library tonight. I'd like to do a few thank yous. I'd like to thank Scott Sparling for being here. Randy Riley from the Library of Michigan, who's come all the way up from Lansing and via Grand Marais, so that was quite a trip, right?
Okay, smile for once.
And the Friends of Bayliss Library for the refreshments. As usual, they're wonderful. So thank you very much. And the Chippewa County Historical Society for the lobby display, in particular Dennis Hank and Richard Troutwine for the great train display. And I don't know if you noticed the photo over in the corner of the International Bridge, the first International Bridge. There's a train on that bridge. So if you have a chance later on to take a closer look at it, it's a passenger train coming over from Canada.
Okay, now.
This program is part of the Library of Michigan's 2012 Michigan Notable Books Author Tour. Every year, the Michigan Notable Books program chooses 20 outstanding fiction and nonfiction books written about Michigan or by Michigan authors and published in the previous calendar year. I encourage you to check the complete 2012 list printed on the bookmarks that there are available for you. And you can also see some on the website www.michigan.gov/notablebooks. This year, 14 authors have been visiting 50 libraries throughout the state. Bayliss Library and our branch Curtis Library in Curtis was fortunate to have been selected as tour stops this year. These free presentations are brought to you by the Library of Michigan, Michigan Department of Education, Michigan Humanities Council, Cooley Law School, the Library of Michigan Foundation, Auto Owners Insurance, Meyer, and the Michigan Center for the Book. Media sponsors are WKAR, City Pulse Dome, Q Advertising, and Genera Photography. And we'd really like to thank these sponsors. That's an impressive list of sponsors that make all of this possible for us. So thank them. The Michigan Humanities Council has asked that we fill out evaluations so that they can tell the value of these programs. So if you'd let them know that it was actually worthwhile coming here, we think it is. Scott thinks it is, he's here. So if you let them know, we'd appreciate that. Scott Sparling was born and raised in Jackson, Michigan, graduated from Antioch College in Ohio. He now lives outside Portland, Oregon, but is a frequent visitor to Michigan. He's also the founder and editor of SeegerFile.com, the largest and oldest website about the music of Bob Seger. How cool is that? His debut book, Wire to Wire, is a crime novel with a full cast of colorful characters, including the brain-damaged freight car hopping lead character. Scott will tell you about the actual freight trips that Wire to Wire is based upon, including one that passed through Sault Sainte Marie. He'll also tell us why it took him 20 years to write the book and to get it published. Please join me in welcoming author Scott Sparling.
Well, thanks. Now this is, I've done almost 40 presentations, I think, and I never stand behind the podium because I just feel like it's friendlier to stand out here, but I can't resist this. I just want to know where you got the sign, and it's not a crossing, it's a yes, right? Yeah, there are sometimes when I'll be in Detroit and go to concerts and stuff, people know me for this Bob Seger website much more than the fact that I wrote a book. And in fact, they didn't even know I wrote a book. When I read in Ann Arbor, there were about half as many people at the bookstore than there are here tonight. And we talked about my book for a half hour, and then we all went to a bar next door and talked about Bob Seger for 2 hours. Which we can do tonight if you want. Actually, I was going to talk about two things, and plus whatever else you're interested in. But a lot of the book has to do with riding trains, hopping freight trains, And I can talk about, and most of the trips in the book that are described, they're fictional, but they're based on freight trips that I took. When I was in high school and college, and then after college, I spent a lot of time hopping freight trains all across America. And so some of those stories ended up in the book, and some of them I still like to tell. So I'm glad to talk about that. And then, as Ken said, it took, I tell people it took 20 years to write the book. That math is a little bit off because I really started in 1986. And I walked into a class at, happened to be at the University of Washington in Seattle, one of their night classes. It wasn't really a college class, but kind of a extension class, on the evening of my 30th birthday, and walked out a changed person and thinking, I'm going to write a book. And that was the beginning of Wire to Wire, which got published last year. So it was 20 years plus going down that road. So I'm glad to talk about what that journey, why it took so long, and what that journey was like. I'll tell you a little bit about hopping trains a little bit, because I started really, I guess, young. I mean, I was in 10th grade, and lived in Jackson, Michigan. And anybody been? I know Ken's been to Jackson. Anybody else been to Jackson? Been through. Yeah, didn't stop because what's there to stop for? Prison, exactly. And so it's probably best not to stop for that. Yeah, if you my neighbors worked for the prison or they worked for the utility, and those were the two big employers. And then they have the Cascades. That's the other reason to go to Jackson. But, it's an okay place today. I think it was a pretty dull place growing up. If you're a teenager, it's the late 60s, it's early 70s. Things are happening. The Summer of Love, Woodstock. Things are happening everywhere, but not in Jackson. And really, all the friends I had, we all, had to decide north, south, east, west. Where are we going? When we graduate. And many of them, and one in particular, came north. To the Traverse City area. So there wasn't a lot to do, but I lived outside of Jackson on the kind of swampy, foresty part of the country, on a dead-end street. And at the end of the road, we were the last house on a dead-end road. And then there was a swamp. And then there were trails through this swamp, which we knew about because we were teenage boys, that led to the tracks. And we go to the tracks. I mean, we did that because, not really because of trains, really. We did that to get away from adults. I mean, we were teenagers. We wanted to hang out someplace where we could talk and spend some time and not have parents around. But eventually, of course, the temptation comes along to grab onto one of these trains, and we experimented and learned how to grab onto the ladders on the outside of a boxcar. And then, we kind of started making our own rules for how to do this. It was really me and one other close friend named Jesse. And Jesse was the guy who was really in love with trains. I mean, I think he was just born to go riding trains. And he would always want to grab onto one of these cars and ride it to the freight yard downtown. And we'd figure out how to do longer trips. We'd drive outside of town. We'd purposely drive like 20 miles away, wait to where we knew the train would stop. And then we'd hop onto a boxcar when it stopped. Because at that time, hopping freight, you're probably thinking the people running alongside the car, throwing their pack in. That came later. We didn't, as high school students, we didn't know how to do that. We would wait till the train stopped, climb into one of these boxcars, and then ride it to the freight yard, which was a good 2-3 hours worth of entertainment for us. That train went all the way from Jackson to Elkhart, Indiana. Because even though Jackson was a dull place, and not a lot happening for a kid, it's always been a railroad hub. The Jackson train station is the oldest continually operating train station in the United States. It's been operating continuously longer than any other train station because a lot of tracks just cross in Jackson. So we could ride down to Elkhart and back. What really got interesting, though, was when we started riding up north and going first to Durand, to some of the towns along the way, and then up to Frankfurt and Alberta, which really became the center of it became the part of Michigan I fell in love with. And here's what happened. Let me switch gears a little bit and tell you why that area was so special to me. Jackson in the late 1960s may have been a dull place, but my dad grew up in Hillsdale, Michigan, and he was born in 1920. And Hillsdale wasn't much of a town in the 60s, at least not through the eyes of a teenager it wasn't. And it probably wasn't much through my dad's eyes in the 1920s and 1930s. His family owned a dairy. His job was to drive the milk cart, deliver milk. He started driving when he was 14. And the first thing that really got him out of Hillsdale happened when he was a senior in high school. A family friend had a camp up on Crystal Lake. And I don't know if any of you have been in Crystal Lake, but it's right outside of Frankfurt, near Alberta, Benzie County. Just beautiful. And to my dad, who, back then, you're talking, this must have been mid-30s, you didn't just hop in the car and drive all around back then. You didn't get on a plane and go to California or something. I don't think my dad had ever been out of Hillsdale, to be honest. And all of a sudden, he's spending the summer in this beautiful place, trees, lakes, Lake Michigan, and he's a handyman for the girls' camp. I think he suddenly felt like he was in paradise. Well, I know, because he passed away a while ago, but I found, when I was cleaning stuff up, I found the cardboard box with the letters from the girls in that girls' camp, from that he had saved, for over 50 years. So I know that it was a life-changing experience for him. The other thing I learned is, as a parent now, no matter how far you push something back in your closet, eventually your kids find it. That's the other thing. That's the other thing to remember. So this world of northern Michigan, I think it cast its spell on my dad, and when he got married and I was born, my sister was born, we went up there every year. I mean, we were not kids who ever said, take us to Disneyland, or let's go to Florida. No, we wanted to go to Frankfurt, we wanted to go to Beulah, we wanted to go to Traverse City. We fell in love with northern Michigan. And there's something special about Frankfurt that brought the two things that we were in love with together. Because in Frankfurt, up until I think maybe the 1980s, had the huge car ferries. And that's a misnomer, really, because they were railroad ferries. And to me, as a teenager, they were the biggest things I'd ever seen. I mean, my jaw just fell open the first time I saw them. These are ships big enough that you put an entire train inside the ship. The hull of the ship raises up, and inside there are 4 tracks. So you cut that train into 4 sections, shove it onto the ship, in Frankfurt, Michigan, and then it takes a 4 or 3.5 hour trip over to Kewanee or Manitowoc, exactly. And I think it also went up to Manistee, some of them. I'm not sure if the trains went up there. Maybe they did. And you could ride on there. They took tourists as well. You could put your car on there, and you could just get a passenger ticket and ride over, which we did a couple times. My buddy Jesse, was the first time I showed him to this, he's like, yeah, but a passenger ticket on something like that would be like $100. And I happen to know it was $9, and I've always wished I'd just said, okay, I'll get you one, change. But at that point, we were riding freight trains all around northern Michigan. We learned how to ride from Ann Arbor to up to Frankfurt, and eventually across the lake, across Wisconsin, and from Minneapolis, that became my base for a while, rode down into Iowa, rode down out to Seattle. There's a way back then where you could grab a boxcar. You could go to the Minneapolis freight yard. And that's a big freight yard. It's confusing. you have to ask the workers what's going on, where's the outbound trains. So it's a scary place, particularly at night, and we would go there at night because it was, in theory, less likely to be caught. But if you got on the right string, or the right track, you could get into a boxcar in Minneapolis, 2.5 days later, get out of that same boxcar in Everett, Washington, just north of Seattle. Going through, across North Dakota, Montana, near the Glacier National Park. You go through the longest railroad tunnel in the United States. I mean, it's just an amazing trip. And you see the most amazing things. You see things that I don't think you would see in a car. Because you're back where there's no radio. I remember waking up some mornings thinking, there's just trees as far as I can see. I don't know where, there's no signs, of course. There's no billboards. There's nothing to tell you where you are, except the milepost signs. Sometimes they will help. And I did that trip a couple of times, just going out to Minneapolis, going out to the West Coast. One time I did it, I got out in north of Seattle there, and boxcars, I just said some of the great things about them. Here's one of the bad things. They're dirty. You can, depending on what's been loaded in them before you were on it, they can get real dirty. And not all boxcars are the same. Sometimes we'd get a ride, and what you really looked for was a boxcar with a wooden floor, not a metal floor, because the wood floor absorbs some of the shock. And also, when you're sleeping at night, you sleep on a wood floor, it's a lot warmer. It'd be even better if it's a boxcar with a wooden floor in between two cars that are loaded, because those are heavier, right? And that's going to keep that boxcar from bouncing up and down as much as it is. And you'd like to get in one that's clean, but oftentimes you can't be choosy about that. The train's going, there's the car, you hop in, and I get out to Everett, and I'm just filthy, and I see a laundry, so I head out to this coin laundry, and I'm washing all my clothes, and there's another guy about my age in the laundry, and we get to talking, and he says he's from Minneapolis, and he just came out. I said, and I'm feeling like, yeah, but I came out by fast. So I tell him, yeah, I just came out too. I just hopped a freight train out here. And he says, yeah, so did I. Which car were you on? I mean, there were just people who did this, young guys who would spend some time every summer trying to ride a new rail. And the thing about the key to it is, it really works if you don't care where you're going and you don't care when you get there. Because if you've got a schedule, then I think it's just not going to work. The trains decide where you go and when you go. A lot of the times what we would do is, we started this as in high school students. Did it in college when we had time, then after college, kept doing it. A lot of my friends after college, I graduated from college in 1976, and a lot of my friends, they either, in fact all of them really did one of two things. They all either got a job or they went to law school. And I thought, those are two really bad life choices, I mean, you're 20, 21 years old, the world's out there, and law school, job, really? What we would do is we'd get some kind of simple job that you could do from September through maybe May, maybe April, depending on how long it would take to save up $300, $400. And then in May and April, you quit the job. And then you have $300, $400 and you can make it through the summer. You can travel all summer. You might have to stop at Harry and David out in Oregon and pick some fruit. But you get through the summer and then you repeat that for 3 or 4 years until something kicks in and you grow up and decide you're going to get a job and an apartment or a house or something, which is basically what happened to us. That's how we lived for about 4 years after graduating from college. We were not, there are other people out there on the road that they were older than us. They were full-time, what used to be called hobos. They were guys who had either down in their luck or made the wrong choices, and they were not doing it for kicks. They were doing it because that's what their life was and who they were. And we tried we tried, for the most part, to stay to ourselves. People always say, well, was it dangerous? And it's like, well, it probably was. It didn't never seem dangerous to me. But you see other people and you'd never know exactly why they were there. And they would look at us and think exactly the same thing. And so, people kind of, if somebody else was already in a car, we'd choose a different car. And that's what we did. My friend Jesse, as I said, was the guy who was just kind of fell in love with riding freights. I think he just had some natural ability for freight riding, that he just seemed at home in a freight ride. I was always maybe at first a little bit scared, but I knew that he knew what he was doing, and pretty soon I started to feel like I knew what I was doing. A lot of it is about getting the right information. Which train, when's this train leaving? Where is it going? It's knowing your limits, because we got to the point where we could jump onto a moving boxcar, but you had to be sure before you tried that you could really do it. There was no, I think I can do it. That doesn't count. It's got to be, this will work. Particularly because you got a backpack, and you throw the backpack in first. Okay, so after that, if it turns out you can't get in, your backpack's on its way to San Diego or something. And Jesse just had kind of an eye for deciphering, decoding what was going on with trains, because part of it is just an information game. There's nobody in the yard whose job it is to tell you. There's no one designated. You help the guys who come in and want to hop trains. You got to kind of get that information out of them somehow, or get it yourself. I remember we made this goal at one summer. It was really our biggest goal. We'd been doing this for a long time. We felt like, let's do something really big. Let's do something, that we can say we've done and we'll never meet anybody else who's done it. Let's hop freight from Vancouver, British Columbia, from basically mile zero there at the Pacific Ocean, all the way across Canada to wherever it ends, I've forgotten, in Newfoundland, all the way across the continent, ocean to ocean, by freight train. Let's do it. And it was always Jesse who said, let's do it. And it was always me who said, well, I got a job and my girlfriend wants to go to a concert 3 weeks from now, and I don't have that much money. He was always saying, let's do it. And he was one of these guys who, when he said, he wouldn't let up. And eventually he could talk you into it. And he always did. He always talked me into it. So, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to ride all the way across Canada. We felt like we knew what we were doing because we'd ridden all over the United States at that point. We'd ridden down to Arizona and up the California coast. Gosh, up the coastline from Petaluma north to some of the most beautiful country you're ever going to see by freight train. Canada turned out to be different because in Michigan, Michigan and all the United States, if they caught you, they didn't really care. That was the trick. In fact, the train crew almost always knew you were on because you'd already talked to them or they saw you. And the crew, the train crew is made up of guys who love trains. And they see a couple other guys who love trains and they were riding in a boxcar. 90% of the time, that was fine with them. The guys in the yard, their job description said they were supposed to keep us out of the yard. So usually if they caught us, what would happen is be a friendly guy wearing some overalls saying, get in the truck, I can't let you be here while I'm here, but I'm off at 6:30 so you can come back then. That was about the biggest punishment we ever got. We had to walk back. Canada was quite different. Canada, for one thing, it was like they had little GPS things on us. So we'd get in the yard and they'd find us. I got so used to being caught in the yard that when we were in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg's a big, confusing yard, lots of different sections to it. We were trying to get across the continent, and we spent the night hiding in this boxcar, actually a grain hopper, and wake up, and you're stiff, and okay, let's see if we can find a train going east. And I look around and I see a Jeep and I see a guy in there with a tie, and I know that's security. That's not a brakeman, that's not an engineer, that's security. So I walk over to him and I say, yeah, we're sorry, we didn't, and I realized, he hadn't even seen me. I was just so used to being caught, I just turned myself in. It was like, get in the back. And the thing in Canada was, what they always said to us was, okay, it's the first time we're driving near the edge of town, we catch you again, you're getting deported. And the only saving grace was, this is pre-computers. So when they caught us again, what they said was, in the next town, they said, okay, the first time, if we catch you again, you're getting deported. We got caught for the first time, like 10 times in a row in Canada. And we never actually, we got as far as Toronto. It took us so long to make that trip that we got to Toronto. And my girlfriend I told my girlfriend, okay, we're taking this trip across Canada. Jesse wants to go across Canada. My girlfriend rolls her eyes like, oh, good. And but I'll meet you in Traverse City on July 4th. If I'm not there on July 4th, wait for me, I'll be there on July 5th. I promise, I'll be there either July 4th or July 5th. I'm not sure when, but wait for me. Well, we're in Toronto, it's July 3rd. And we've been on the road twice as long as I thought it would take, and we still got a big chunk of Canada to cover. And this Toronto freight yard, it's after dark, and we're on one of these piggyback cars, what we call a piggyback car. It's a flat car, it's got a freight, like the body of a truck, it's a diesel semi-truck on it with they would just unhitch the back of those things and drive them right up there. So the big truck wheels, tires were still there, and you could hide between those things. And we're huddled in there hiding. And I'm telling Jesse, I gotta go, because I told my girlfriend I'd meet her tomorrow in Traverse City. And he says, yeah, but we're so close, another couple weeks, maybe in 10 days we could do this. And he just starts talking me into it again. And so we end up making a deal. When I tell him, okay, I had these really detailed maps of the Canadian Pacific line, or the Canadian National Line, because what I'd done is I'd written to Canadian National Railroad before the trip, saying, I'm a student researching railroads in Canada, and they sent me this really detailed map, which I had folded up and carried with me in my backpack. And so I knew all the names of every little siding, because all those things have a code on them, right? And there was one that was called, I forget what the one on the west side was called, but there was one on the east that was called Don, D-O-N, and that was just the name of a siding. There was nothing there, but that's what it was. And so Jesse says, tell you what, here's a deal. Let's just stay on this car. If it's going east toward Atlantic Ocean, Newfoundland, we'll stay on it. We'll ride it. But if it's going west, back towards where your girlfriend is, you can get off. And to show you how kind of crazy and also stupid and passionate we were about it, I said, okay. The train starts creaking along really slow, and finally we see the next siding. I look at my map and it's Don, which means we're going west back towards Traverse City. And I get off, and deal's a deal. And I didn't get to Traverse City on the 4th, but I got there on the 5th. And she was waiting for me. So, and today we're married. We've been married since 1990. So it all worked. And what if the train had been going the other way? Would I be standing here today? I don't know. I mean, it could have been a different life, I guess. So let's kind of switch gears. We've been talking a while now about freights, and tell you about how this came together in a book. So like I said, I'd always really wanted to write, but I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to be a newspaper reporter, journalist. And the problem is that I looked like this, like I do in these pictures up here. I had this afro, and of course I tended to disappear in the summer to ride freights, and newspaper editors were not impressed with my resume. But I ended up getting a job. I managed to get a job at the utility in Seattle, where my girlfriend and I were living. And they had this deal with the University of Washington where people who worked for the city could take these extension classes half price. And I looked in the catalog thinking I should do this because it's it's a bargain, it's hard to resist. but which one do I want? And I'm looking through it, and it's like, writing fiction. So, okay, I'm not interested in fiction really, but I like to write, and this sounds interesting. And I don't have to pay $60. It's only $30 because I get it, for half price. That's why I took it. And it was a room. It was kind of like this room, kind of the cinder block thing, except it wasn't quite this big, and had this whole wall was like a blackboard, and there was a no smoking sign over there and a no smoking sign over there, and the instructor, a guy named Jack Cady, spent 3 hours walking from there to pacing back and forth beneath those signs, smoking. And talking about fiction. I mean, and in a way that I had never heard anybody talk about fiction. And he was an older guy, former Coast Guard guy, former truck driver, former auctioneer. He had that auctioneer presence. I mean, he could have been a preacher if he wanted to. He just had that way, that persuasive way at the front of the class. And I sat there for 3 hours that night, and when I left, I thought, this is it. I want to learn what this guy knows, and I knew that my life had to change, and then I wanted to write a book. I told everybody, I'm going to quit my job and write a book. I didn't know how to write a book, but that's what I told people I was going to do. And I knew two things. I knew, or I thought I knew two things. I thought I knew something about riding trains that other people hadn't experienced. And a lot of people have written about kind of the hobo life, the Depression era guys who are out there on riding the rails because they have to. But I had never read anything about young guys who are out there seeing the world kind of as an adventure. And I often think back now, why did we do that? People ask me why we did that, and I'll tell them, well, it's because I didn't. It's Jesse wanted to do it, and he said it would be fun, and I said okay. But I think it goes a little deeper than that. I think now, as an adult looking back, I think I was that age where you need, I was starting in my teens and in my early 20s, where you need to kind of go out and test yourself against the world, especially if you're a guy, I think. And you need to go out and, and some people, they enlist. And I guess some people go to law school, and other people find other ways to challenge themselves. And this was the way we challenged ourselves. Go out to a freight yard, live by your wits with what you can carry in your pack, stay safe, hide from the tower, don't get caught, figure out where the train's going, find a place to sleep, do it again the next day, and keep going. So I knew something about that I thought other people didn't know. And then the other thing was northern Michigan. Because once you're out in Seattle and the other part of the country and you say Michigan, people don't know about it. I mean, it's a secret. They picture Detroit, they picture southern Michigan. And here's this place that I'd fallen in love with, this beautiful place that I thought, if somehow I could write a book that was about riding trains in northern Michigan, that might be a book people would want to read. Or at least it would be a book that came from the heart, at the very least. And I told myself I'm going to quit my job. Eventually I did quit my job. I took 5 years off. And I said to myself, writing fiction is like learning another language. It's like learning to speak, some other language fluently. It's going to take me a while. I'll give myself 5 years. And so for 5 years I did that writer thing where you get an apartment and you're living hand to mouth, and I had no car payment, no mortgage payment, no insurance payment. I had a couple of credit cards I could run up, and I thought, okay. And so for 5 years I worked on this book. At the end of the 5 years, I had a 700-page manuscript about riding trains in northern Michigan. No plot, and people would tell me that it was oh, I like your writing, but I don't understand. There's no story. And I thought, why a story? Who needs a story? I was kind of that school of mind that if the writing is good, this a story is for people who sell out and want to sell, write romance novels or something. I'm not going to have a story in my book. And I had spent enough time around northern Michigan with my buddy. I've told you about my buddy Jesse, who always wanted to ride trains. My other best friend left high school and bought some land, 5 acres of land outside of Maple City, in Leelanau County. Built a cabin, then built a house, and the cabin was always there for me. So I would spend, during that 5 years when I was trying to write the book, every summer I'd come back and I'd live in that cabin. And I'd just take notes about northern Michigan. I'd learn about the cherry farmers and how they would, The big cherry trucks coming around the corner would sometimes, a few cherries would fall off, and you'd see all these little details that are in the book, all were in these notebooks that I kept those summers living in that cabin outside Maple City. And the other cool thing about being in Maple City is you're very close to Leland, and if you go out at night, go to the Pour House or the Sugarfoot Saloon or the Blackbird, fairly decent chance you might run into Jim Harrison, who's lived up there, still lived up there then. And we did. We saw him in a lot of those places. I had one time sat right next to Jim Harrison at the Sugarfoot Saloon, which, if you're somebody I'm trying to write a book, I'm trying to write a manuscript, and this is like Jim Harrison on the stool next to me drinking it. It was like, and I specifically asked him to pass me the mustard, and he did. He seemed like a friendly guy. And I thought, if he's a friendly guy, he probably would enjoy getting my manuscript in his mailbox someday. Turns out he did not. So I get all done, and now I'm back in Seattle. Because the 5 years have gone by. I've produced this 700-page manuscript with no plot about trains and northern Michigan. In fact, anybody here ever see the movie My Dinner with Andre? Two guys go to a restaurant, all they do is talk. It was like my manuscript was My Dinner with Andre without the dinner. And it wasn't in a restaurant, it was in a boxcar, and guys weren't talking, they were shouting. So I put it in a big envelope, and I write, Jim Harrison, Lake Leelanau, Michigan, stick it in the mail. I know where Jim lives, because everybody up there does. You drive by and you say, that's Jim Harrison's farmhouse. But I didn't know the road or the address or anything. But I figured, what's the postman going to do? He's going to get this thing and he's going to take it over to Jim's house. That's exactly what happened. And 2 weeks later, I get a letter from Jim Harrison. And so again, sitting next to him on the bar stool, and the second most heart-stopping thing was holding this letter, thinking, holy crap, he's written me back. And I open it up, and it says, never do this again. It says, how many people send me manuscripts, and they give me, the what for doing this. But then he says, he's nice about it. He says, I took a glance at it, and it looked pretty good. So I passed it on to my agent, and then the last line, I've always remembered his last line, which is I think classic Harrison. His last line was, more than this I cannot do, Jim. Which I was like, that's a nice way of saying, buzz off, kid. It's become, in fact, in our house now, it's become kind of a catchphrase for me and my friends. It's like, yeah, I'll take out the trash, but more than this I cannot do. So a couple weeks later, I get a letter back from his agent. And his agent says, hey, Jim said he liked the writing, and I do like it, it's pretty good, but it's got no plot. And nobody knows who you are. You're an unknown author with a story that doesn't have a plot to it. And his closing line, I've also always remembered, was, I can't sell this, and neither can anybody else. Hope you prove me wrong, Bob DeTiller, I think was his name. And I looked at that and thought, I can't sell this, and neither can anybody else. I've been working on this for 5 years. I've put my heart into this. I've maxed out 2 credit cards. I'm now in my almost 30, and I've got $10,000-$15,000. Well, it's the Reagan era. You're supposed to have a lot of debt, but still, it's like, this is my thing that I've attached my whole adult life to. I can't sell this, and neither can anybody else. And I think he's got to be wrong. He's just got to be wrong. He's Jim Harrison's agent. All he has to do is hold up the manuscript and say, who'll start the bidding? What does he know about selling a manuscript? So I figure I'm going to put this theory to the test. I'm going to send this out to some young agents who are go-getters, who want to discover new authors. And I'll test his theory. Well, the test lasted 10 years. And after which time I decided, he's right. It does need a plot. And so other things happened in that. The thing the test lasted 10 years was a little bit facetious, although I did continue to send it out and try to see. But then I started doing some other things too. My friends would tell me, Scott, you've been working on this book for over a decade. It's great, it's great, but it's not selling, and you're all tangled up in it. Why don't you get a new ream of paper, blank paper, and start over on a new book. And I would look at them, and in my heart I would know they are absolutely right. That is what makes sense to do. And if I were doing this because it made sense, I would follow their advice, but this is not a logical thing I'm doing. This is a thing that comes from the heart, and what my heart wants to do is finish this book. But I'll meet them halfway. I will put it aside for a while, and I'll work on some other project. I know a lot about Bob Singer. I used to live in Ann Arbor. You go down and walk 4 or 5 blocks, go down into the Primo, pay $3 at the door and hear Bob play, sometimes to no more people than we're in this room right now. I'd heard him a lot. I'd always loved him. I've saved every clipping I ever had about him. And this is 1997. There's no website about him. So I can go online and create my own website. And this is pre-Google, pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, pre-everything. And I ended up creating the Seeger file, which has since 15 years later still. I got an email from someone today saying, "Hey, your website's more up to date than the official one," which is, an official one is just trying to sell you a T-shirt. My website actually has information on it. So I started doing the Seeger file. My wife and I got married. We would start a family. It's not like I spent 10 years continuously, but 10 years elapsed. And I would sometimes put that manuscript aside, but then I would start to not feel happy. And I would ask myself, what's wrong? Everything's good. Why am I not happy? And I would remember, it's because I'm not working on it. And I would go back and I'd work on it some more. And eventually I figured out, I met 2 other teachers who helped me immensely. The first teacher, Jack Kay, the guy who was pacing in between those no smoking signs, he really had 2 rules. One was, play with it the way a child would play with it. Don't make it into work. We're talking about the creative process here. Be childlike in your playfulness. And the second rule was make lots of mistakes. Because if you aren't making mistakes, then you're not taking any risks. And if you're not taking any risks, you're not doing anything that other people are going to want to read. So get a couple of reams of paper and fill them up with mistakes. And remember, when you start out, all the characters will be just like you. They'll be little versions of you. They'll say the things you say, they'll do what you would do, they'll have your values. Eventually you will discover them saying something you don't agree with. Eventually they'll start doing things you would never do and having values that are not your values, and that's when you know it's alive and you've got something. Those were his only rules. And I think writers are hesitant to give, professional established writers are hesitant to give those of us who are trying to write a book rules because there's so many bad things we can do with a good rule. I took a workshop later from Richard Ford who said sentences live in their verbs. That's a true thing. I mean, that's a good piece of advice from a Pulitzer Prize winning author. And I went home and I took every sentence and shoehorned the most outrageous verbs and just ruined, the whole chapter. I was like, okay, that's not what he meant. I finally met 2 teachers in Portland who helped me understand how story works, who could see the story that I was trying to write. That's not really true. They were seeing a story that was kind of hovering above the page. Because a lot of people can take your manuscript and they can look at it and say, okay, this is what you've got here. Let me tell you what I think about what you've got here. But they were able to say, okay, there's something hovering over this that you haven't got to yet. It might be this, it might be that. Think of what would happen if your character did this. What happened in the past that makes your character think that? And they were the 2 people who started me down the path to writing what is the story that's in the book today. And it's called a crime novel. It's about, to me, it's about, well, actually, I should say, I discovered it was a crime novel when I got the published copy and saw that on the back of the cover, back cover. I had no idea that it was a crime novel until then. If you would ask me at any time from 1986 to 2010 if I was writing a crime novel, I would have said no. I'm writing a novel about trains, about northern Michigan, about what happens when you fall in love with your best friend's girlfriend, about loneliness, and about memory, how memory works. That's what's in it for me. Not to say there isn't a lot of crime and some drugs and some sex and some shooting and some explosions and some car chases. That's there too. So if you want to read it for that stuff, you can. And that's, I think, in some cases what keeps you turning the pages. I want to find out what happens next. That's the difference between this book and the 700-page manuscript that was just trains in northern Michigan. So I don't really like to read a whole lot from the book, but I want to read you one short section, just a couple of paragraphs about hopping trains, and it'll take like 2 minutes. And then if you got questions, be glad to answer them. This is a section that I told you I spent from 1986 on working on this book. This is probably a section that got written in the late 1980s. And it's about, the reason I like to read it is it really goes right to the heart of what I loved about trains, is that they showed you things that you couldn't see other places. In fact, just as a setup, the two characters in this book that are named Slater and Harp is the one who loves to ride trains. And his girlfriend Lane doesn't like the fact that he rides trains, and doesn't understand what the big thrill is. So Harp tells his buddy Slater to try to explain it, and Slater says, it wasn't the danger. If you did it right, the danger was small, but you had to do it right every single second. And that was part of how it made you feel alive. The things you had to do were always simple. Don't get set out, hide from the tower, find water. But the things you had to do were also hard. You had to get information, you had to talk to workers, but talking to workers was how you got caught. You had to solve a lot of problems, but there was none of the daily BS, and that was the best part. No, wait a minute, Slater says, actually the best part is what the train shows you. In a car or a truck, you face forward, so you see what's coming at you. But a boxcar makes you look out the side. It's all now, now, now. And that really is maybe the main thing about when you ride a train. It shows you things you wouldn't otherwise see. So here's a very short section from later in the book when Harp is riding a train. He just jumped on this train. He's actually in Winona, Minnesota, right on the Mississippi, the other side of the Mississippi River. He wants to ride the train across the Mississippi River, across Wisconsin, and then into one of those big, huge car ferries, say from Kewanee to Frankfurt, and back to his girlfriend, whose name is Lane. The other thing I should point out is, even though the book is set in Frankfurt, the characters kind of live in Frankfurt, and that's where all the main action happens. In the book, I call it Wolverine, because I didn't know there was a real place called Wolverine in Michigan. Until I was 10 years into the manuscript, and I showed it to my buddy in Maple City. He says, "You got Wolverine on the shore of Lake Michigan, and it's really over here." And I said, "What do you mean, really? There's no," and there really is, of course, a real Wolverine. When I finally got it published, I said to the publisher, they said, "Well, just so you know, there really is a town called Wolverine." And they said, "Well, you got to change it. That'll confuse everybody." I said, "I'm not changing. No one will care because it's a very small town." And it turns out they were right. People do care. People in Michigan care. He doesn't even know where Wolverine is. So when I say Wolverine, I really mean Frankfurt. So here's Harp. He's just jumped on this train. He's going back across Mississippi, Wisconsin. Got to go back to see his girlfriend Lane. On the Wisconsin, he's already in the boxcar. On the Wisconsin side of the river, the train surprised him by taking a switch. Instead of rolling east, it swung onto the southbound tracks of the Burlington Northern, carrying him away from Michigan, away from Lane, who was waiting for him, and into Iowa instead. Clear of the bridge, the freight was already picking up speed. There was little time to sort things out. Harp grabbed his pack and crouched by the door, searching for a spot to jump, looking for switches that might snap an ankle or bust his head. But even as he tensed to jump, part of him thought how he had never ridden the southbound rails. Iowa was full of railroad towns he'd never seen. He hesitated a second or two longer, and then stepped back from the door, letting the moment pass, letting the train decide where he would go. Lane could wait a few more days. It was the right thing to do. He was sure of it. In another minute, the southbound was rolling fast. The freight swayed through gullies, cutting through trees and overgrown brush. Pockets of cold blew up over Harp when the track dipped close to the river. He got out a joint and lit it, remembering nights when he woke beside Lane and found himself wishing for the boxcar floor instead. He worried sometimes that the memory of her body, which he carried with him, pleased him more than the real thing. It would be better, he knew, if he stayed home in Michigan more. but there was no stopping the going. The track got louder as he got high, and soon the railroad revealed its secrets. A curving track, a river of boxcars. Sioux, Great Northern, Milwaukee, Chessie, Canadian Pacific, Short Life and Misery 050616, boxcar with a wooden floor, the boxcar carrying harp through the upper Midwest, and the song of the wheels is Ride. Ride, past scrap heaps and factories and beaten bums waving, past the ends of towns, through empty fields and junkyards, past everything man has made and things man can never make, eventually past light. At night, Harp stood in the boxcar, and a halo rode the train, low above the engine, while landscapes turned amber, half-finished, pristine, and never glimpsed again. Through Minnesota, moons veered from safe trajectories, and the brightest lights of cities blew past like sparks from a half-smoked joint. I'll light it, you light it, let me light it. The air warm like Lane's body. Ride in a soft cloth sleeping bag if you can, if they don't detrain you or ditch you or spot you at sidings or kick you over the hump. Ride, then wake in the darkness with a clatter song loud, a stream of words launched from a sling, all tearing past at once. And from the deep part of the night, one word rings clear, one word, an inscription, Ride. The Iowa train took him to East Dubuque, and from there to Green Island, and then the dregs of Davenport. Finally, he caught a freight back to the switchyard in St. Paul. Some people said that St. Paul was called the Pig's Eye Yard. Some people said it wasn't. With trains, there were always things you didn't know. A switch engine in the center of the yard was pushing a string of cars up the hump. At the crest, a hump rat lifted the coupler pin, setting each car free to be shunted onto one of a dozen outbound tracks sorted by destination. Harp's car moved slowly to the top of the hump, where it was cut loose. It gathered speed and momentum on its downhill run until it was flying. Finally, it banged onto a string of outbound cars, coupling on with such force that the door slammed shut, sealing it in darkness. But by then, Harp was already out of the car and watching from the shadows, knowing when to ride and how to wait, and that his fate was with the train. So that's a little bit of Harp's world. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have about freight trains or writing or Bob Seger or any of that stuff. Sometimes I read a story about when we it's always, sooner or later the temptation comes along to take your girlfriend on a freight ride. Always a bad idea. And so the other piece I sometimes read, it's a longer piece, and I don't want to read it tonight, but the gist of it is we started in Ann Arbor and trying to get up to Frankfurt, and as we're leaving, the brakeman's about our age, he sticks his head in the car and says, they're going to spot you at Whitmore Lake. And Whitmore Lake's just like 30 miles, not even that, from Ann Arbor. And I can't figure out what he means, because they've already spotted us, they're going to spot you. What could that mean? Because that's fascinating. For someone who's interested in writing, the language of railroads was always interesting. It's like, I remember I was riding in Washington when there's a town in Washington called Yakima, and I was not there, but I was heading there, and this guy said, "You're going to die in Yakima." And I thought, well, okay, that probably means the train is going to dead end there, right? So, and it did, but I also have never gone back to Yakima. But they said they're going to spy in Whitmore Lake. Well, what it meant was they took our boxcar, they put it at a particular spot on the siding by a locked factory gate all by itself, and the rest of the train was taken off to leave us. And I was thinking, romantic night in the boxcar, gone. It's like, I'm going to be, and so there's nothing else to ride in this train, so we went and ride. Trains usually have more than one engine. The second engine is sometimes called the helper unit. So I told my girlfriend, let's go ride in the helper unit. They won't mind. And I thought, I hope. and we got up in the helper unit. And I'd actually done that before. I'd been in second engines, and once in a while you get a crew that, okay with. This engineer came back and he just read us a riot. I mean, he just gave me hell. And he said, we pleaded with him not to kick us out there because we didn't know where we were really. And he said, okay, I'll take you to Durand, where there's a freight yard. And he kicked us out there. It's 3 a.m. I had no money. I feel like I'm not really impressing my girlfriend. I have no way to get to northern Michigan at that point. And we're just wandering, and we come upon this donut shop, and we're sitting there and having a cup of coffee in the middle of the night, thinking, do I call my parents or what do I do? And the door opens, the brakeman comes in. Well, it makes sense, it's like, okay, the crew. The reason this place is open is the crew comes in there. The brakeman comes in. He says, "Don't worry about that engineering thing. It's a total blowhard." And he draws us a little map of how to get back to the freight yard. And so we do get up north, and we sleep on the beach. We ride the car ferry, and summer ends, and she's going off to her job, and I'm still riding freights. And then that was 76, and so we've been together for closing in on what, 76, 2006, long time, 30 some years. So my experience taking my girlfriend along didn't exactly work out, but it wasn't a disaster. But I tell you, I've heard friends, whenever Jesse took his girlfriend along, that's when you knew things were ending with that girlfriend. Be glad to talk more about riding freights and stuff. If you got questions, if you don't, oh sure, yeah.
How'd you get the title?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's actually a horse racing term. One horse breaks the starting wire ahead of all the others, stays ahead of all the other horses the entire time, and then breaks the finishing wire first. So that horse has won wire to wire. I didn't hear it that way. I heard it in connection with you might have to correct me, I think 1984 Detroit Tigers started the season 30-4. I mean, amazing year in baseball. Only 3 teams in professional, since in the history of Major League Baseball, have won the World Series wire to wire. Meaning they were ahead from day one, through the entire season, through all the playoffs, through the World Series, and the Tigers did that. They won wire to wire. And I was just starting to write my book, and I heard that term, wire to wire. I like that. I'm not writing about the Tigers, so it can't mean that. It's got to mean something else. And it started to mean some of the wires. Slater, the main character in this book, sees much of the book on video screens that he's hallucinating. And there's a lot of wires there. And this is not giving anything away. On page 1 of the book, Slater, the main character, is standing on top of a moving boxcar and gets hit by a power line. Low voltage, thank God, 33,000 volts. Otherwise, that's from a clipping my mom. So when I was riding freight trains, my mom sent me a clipping about some kids who did that. They were on top of a boxcar and got hit, and the guy in the clipping died. And I told my mom, we don't do that. We have rules. We do not ride on top of boxcars. we do not ride on auto carriers where you could mess up the automobiles. And we got standards in our. I saved the clipping, and it's now really what happened in the clipping is now page 1 of the book. There is another meaning that has more to do with how you view life, which I see you've got a copy of the book, so I'm not going to tell you, but you will come to it.
Do you have another novel in mind? Or?
Yeah, I did. When I went through this period of trying to publish Wire to Wire, it got, as with a lot of novels, it got turned down a lot. And after it got turned down a certain number of times, I just thought, I need to write a simpler novel. Wire to Wire has some flashbacks with time. It has, I think, 6 point of view characters. There's a frame story around the real story. So there's some complexity to it that I like, but I know that requires a little bit of more attention from the reader. And maybe I should write a simpler, more straightforward novel. So I started doing that and finished a manuscript, first draft, a couple years ago, which I'm now returning to. I thought that was going to be the book that would open the door for Wire to Wire, and it's turning out to be the other way around. But and it's about, that story. I don't think this really happens, but it's about kidney theft. And that story you sometimes hear, guy goes to a convention, he's at the bar, some cute woman is buying him drinks, they go upstairs to her room, he wakes up in the morning in a bathtub full of ice and his kidney's gone. Okay, that doesn't really happen. But you used to hear that, it's like an urban myth. And so I decided to try to weave a story around what, using that as kind of a starting point, what these characters and might do. And there's no real kidney theft. It's a fake kidney theft. But so yeah, I'm working on that. Hope it's done maybe by the end of the year. But my son will tell you, every year that I was working on Wire to Wire, I said, I hope it's done by the end of the year. So.
Tentative title for your novel?
I do, which no one likes. It's called Aux-in, A-U-X-I-N. It means auxiliary input. And I know that it sounds like ox, O-X-in, and that's why I'm thinking, well, maybe it's not going to work. I might have to change it.
More wire stuff.
It's more wire? Yeah, it is. And it also, the main character is a musician, and he has trouble.
Organ music.
Okay. And yeah, I get it now. Organ music. Well, and he has trouble relating to people because he's a purist. He's only going to play things that, and so his music, he's got no following, he's got no band, he's got nothing, because he won't ever compromise. Writing a 3-minute song would be total heresy to him. And he kind of holds the world at distance that way through his stubbornness. But someone else figures out that there might be an auxiliary input to kind of reach him, a woman. So we'll see. If it ends up being titled something else, I wouldn't be surprised. But that's what I think.
Sounds like an unsuccessful jazz musician.
He's an unsuccessful rock fusion musician. Yeah, which is really interesting to write about. It brings up a lot of questions about what is art for. Do you do it for yourself, or how much do you change it to reach the audience? Ultimately, you need, I think, you can't do it for the audience. There's no audience. It's a hard little balance I think for musicians and probably all artists to read. So it's interesting to me, and that's kind of why I'm. It's like, what's Wire to Wire about? Well, it's a crime novel according to the back cover. To me, it's about loneliness and love and trains. What's Aux-in about? Kidney theft. But really, to me, it's about this issue of how much do you compromise, how do you let people in, how do you keep people out. Those are the themes.
Who's your agent?
You know what? I don't have an agent because
You've never had one?
never had one.
Okay.
Here's how you get a book published. In case there's anybody out there that wants to be a writer, here's what I did. A friend of mine, after years of me sending this book out, and I'd kind of given up. A friend of mine came to me and I met her in a coffee shop. Said, "Hey, how's your book coming?" I said, "Yeah, not much interest in it. Working on something new." She said, "Well, you ought to send it to Tin House Books, because I know those people and they might be the right people for it." I said, "Yeah, that's good, thank you." And I totally forgot. I mean, it was in one ear, out the other. Life goes on. 6 months later, different coffee shops, here again. What the folks at Tin House say? And I say, "Yeah, you know what, I never really sent it to them." And she says, "Well, I'm having dinner with one of them next week. You mind if I give it to him?" And even then I said, "Well, I got a new one. I'm working on a new one. Why don't you give him the new one?" She said, "I've never read your new one. I'm not going to give him a book I've never read." I've read, because she was a friend who'd read in the manuscript. "I've read Wire to Wire. I think they'd like it. Mind if I give it to him?" I said, "Yeah, knock yourself out." Several months go by and I get an email from the executive editor at Tin House saying, "We like your book." And I'm just, thinking, who are these people? I didn't even remember originally who they were. And then it was just stunning. It was just, that's all, and that pretty much all said, "We like your book," just life-changing. So, no, I did not aggressively go out and get an agent. And I tell people that I got my book published the same way that I used to pick up girls when I was younger, which is do absolutely nothing and wait for something to happen. And if you got 20 years, that will work. I mean, as long as you get enough time, that's a winning strategy.
You want to give it to him in one word, you just say serendipity.
Yes. Yep. It was. And you know what? I just love the fact that I'm invited here. I get a chance to talk about my book. you got to write a good manuscript to get published, but you got to get a lot of luck as well. There are people out there with good manuscripts that are still sending it out right now and getting it back in the mail. And
Sad thing is if your name is something like Kim Kardashian, you can put a book out and people
Yeah.
will buy it regardless.
yeah, there's that. But there's a lot of good people who are writing good stuff that are waiting for that break. And so sometimes you got to wait. I mean, that's the way the world works, I think.
Did you ever send a copy to Jim Harrison's agent?
I wrote him a note. He's not as easy to find these days. So I did write him a note. I didn't get a response. He's down he's in Montana and he's down in Arizona. So I don't actually know if my note actually got to him. If I see him at a reading, I would be happy to thank. I mean, tell you what, his one paragraph letter to me, that was the fuel that I lived on for almost 10 years. It's like, nobody wants to publish this book, but Jim was nice enough to write me a letter. I'm going to keep going. So, yeah.
If you write him again, just address it, dear fellow published author.
Yeah, I should do that.
After your submission to that publisher, was that a final, did you have to make some revises?
Yeah,
Revisions.
because I did. We worked on it for a year, actually, back and forth. The way the book is structured, there's a frame structure where the main character, 3 years has passed. The main character has now moved on. He's a video editor. He's got all these screens up there. And on these screens, he's seeing parts of what happened to him in Michigan 3 years earlier. And I originally thought that it would really be fun to have those hallucinations or memories work the way real memories work. Because when we all try to remember what happened in 10th grade, we don't have to first remember first, second, third, fourth. Our memories are not chronological; they're just random access. I thought it'd be cool in this book if the memories come in random, and then the reader would have the fun of putting them back in chronological order. That turned out not to be fun for the reader, and most readers would realize, I don't know what's happening. It's like this happened and that happened. And so I had pretty much gotten that straightened out by the time I gave it to the publisher. But they also helped me. They moved a lot of things. They helped me move some important chapters around. In fact, the first 2 pages, the prologue, happened much later. And they said, put that first, and then we'll work. It'll just give people some signposts as to what happens when. It's a much, much, much better book because of the editors that worked there. I was lucky to get someone who really cared about it and really knew what he was doing and could help me.
Are there any authors that you have read or that maybe whether you read or talked to that also helped you or inspired you?
Yeah. Robert Stone, who has won the National Book Award twice, once for Dog Soldiers, which was a book probably in the late 60s, I'm thinking, about a guy who comes back from Vietnam and gets involved in some drug business. I've gone through 3 copies of that book. The first 2 have fallen apart. Whenever I'm at my desk thinking, what am I doing? I'll just grab it again and read some of that. I like his style. I like his way he puts sentences together. Once in a while in this book, when I was reading the final manuscript, I'd read a sentence that sounded too much like Robert Stone. And I think, wow, it's nice to honor somebody, but that's just too much out inside. I'd have to change it. So I certainly learned a lot from reading his books. My book's in third person, and it's very, I think the readers and publishers are really enjoying first person books right now. And so I would try to read only books in third person, because when I read a book in first person, I'd start picking up stuff that didn't help me. The author who wrote is a book called Going Native and Meditations in Green, named Stephen Wright, not the comedian Stephen Wright, but the author, who writes in a similar style that I like, just eat his stuff up. Yeah, but eventually, almost any writer writing in third person, kind of realistic prose, I would read and sometimes read it out loud. I mean, there's sections of Stone I would just read out loud to figure out what you could do and what you couldn't do. I used to have this thing, another rule I gave myself. You never start a sentence with the words, there was. It's like so boring. There's no emotion in that. There was something. Can't think of something more punch to it. I picked up Dog Soldiers, my favorite book. That's my desert island book. And the very first sentence is, there was only one bench in the shade and Converse went for it anyway. It's like, okay, you can do it. It's like, so yeah, that kind of stuff was just immensely helpful to me.
The second thing is I've noticed this, is there a reason that the book is
Deckled or French cut? That's to make you really appreciate the value of the publisher, I think. They're a small press. They want to be a little distinctive. So all their books are that way, and all of them have this little inside flap, and that's what they do.
It's the first thing I noticed.
Yeah, and as the author, none of that's up to me. They showed me the cover, they showed me the book, they showed me, I don't want to keep you guys, but I'll tell you a real quick story. These days you got to have a little movie trailer video for the book, right? Just like a coming attraction thing at the movies. And so you got to do one for your book. They said, we're going to do a movie trailer or a book trailer for your book. And I said, okay, what's it about? I said, don't worry, we're just going to talk to you. But we're also going to give you the very first copy of your book, because I hadn't seen it at that time. So you come to this cafe tomorrow, or what's tomorrow? It was like 2 weeks from tomorrow or something, and we'll have the film crew there. We'll give you you'll see the book for the first time. You'll unwrap it. You'll take it out of the envelope, and I'll talk to you. I'll ask you some questions, and then we'll go some other places. And nothing you have to rehearse for. You're fine. So we do that, and then we go to and I see this. 26 years has been my kind of thing that I've thrown my whole adult life into, holding it for the first time. And then he says, okay, we're going to go down to in Portland where the trains go pretty slow, and we're gonna walk along there and do some more. So we get there to these tracks in Portland, and they tell me what we're going to do here. My editor is a guy named Tony. He's 30 years old, athletic guy, young guy, genius, I think. And they say, okay, so when the train comes by, if the train comes by, what's going to happen is Tony's going to jump on the train, and you're going to wave to him. And I'm thinking, okay, but why is Tony jumping on the train?
He's 30.
Because and I see the film crew is all 32, right? They're all young kids to my eyes, and I see this look they give each other, like, we don't want to kill the old guy. And it's like, we don't have insurance for that. And I said, no, I can do it. Come on, I still got it. And they said, well, if you can do it, do it. And so, but I can't do it while I'm holding the book. And so they had a production assistant person there, a young woman, and I said, just hold on to my book for me, okay? Please don't get it dirty. And I see that they've decided to take some photos of it sitting on the track. They laid it on the track the way you lay a penny on the track to take some pictures. And I'm not really wild about that because tracks are dirty and greasy, but they're doing it. And meanwhile, Tony and I are getting ready to jump this train, and the train's coming, and they say, run down there, and then grab on. You let Tony get on, and then you grab on, and then wave or talk to each other like you're. And so we do all that. And I jump on this ladder line just perfect, He said, that was great. Go do it again. Run down there again. And so we did this 5 times. And I jumped on every time perfect. It was fantastic. And I get back and I see the young woman. So where's my book? And she said, oh. And then the crew says, oh man, it was so cool. We forgot and left the book on the track. The engine hit the book, compressed it, and then it flew up and there was this bang like a grenade. And then we looked, and the book was flying through the air, and landed like 10 feet away in the dirt. And this young woman who I entrusted said, "I'm so sorry." It's like, "Are you kidding?" It's like, I spent a quarter century writing a book about trains, and the very first copy gets hit by a Union Pacific engine. This is like perfect. This is like I'm never gonna let go of this book. So, yeah, this is the copy. You can see, they got there, and it's all this great stuff. The good thing, it was a thick